Well, again, good morning, folks, and I want to thank those of you who came for Blue Jeans Sunday. You see, I'm wearing blue jeans in a sort of gesture of solidarity. I won't be able to go out there and help because I have to go to a board meeting, but in the words of President Clinton, I feel your pain. And these are not mom jeans. No, they're not. They have a zip. It's okay. I have some stories, of course. One particular one here I'll share with you as a mirth moment. It was St. Paddy's Day last week, and of course some of you may have celebrated that. It's been proven pretty much that everyone has an Irish gene, so we can all take responsibility. This shortly after an outward bound evening Aer Lingus. Aer Lingus is the national airline of Ireland. Carol and I lived in Ireland on and off for about 20 years, and we used to take Aer Lingus from the States all the time. So Aer Lingus, very friendly airline, very sort of folksy. And there was an outbound evening Aer Lingus flight from Dublin to Boston. And the lead flight attendant nervously made the following painful announcement shortly after takeoff. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm so very sorry. It appears there's been a terrible mix-up by our catering service. Since Aer Lingus is a state-run airline, I'm not surprised. I don't know how this happened, but we have 103 passengers on the flight, and unfortunately we only received 40 dinner meals. I truly, truly apologize for this mistake and inconvenience. Of course, there was a lot of muttering and grumbling among the passengers, and when this had died down, the flight attendant continued, anyone who is kind enough to give up their meal so that someone else can eat will receive free unlimited drinks for the duration of our 6-hour flight. Her next announcement came about half an hour before landing at Logan International in Boston. If anyone is hungry, we still have 40 dinners available. The Irish have a very, very unfair reputation for excessive drinking. Now, I don't know about these one-liners. There were a couple here that are worth sharing. You're stuck with your debt if you can't budge it. Well, these are bad. They are bad. A calendar's days are numbered. A lot of money is tainted. Taint yours and taint mine. Those who get too big for their britches will be exposed in the end. When you have seen one shopping centre, you've seen a mall. When she saw her first strands of grey hair, she thought she would die. D-Y-E. So bad. Anyway, please keep them coming because this way we get a little laugh and it's great. This morning I want to become a little more conventional, if I may, and because we're coming up to Easter, talk a little bit about the events surrounding the Easter experience involving Jesus, our great master teacher. So I'm going to share 3 specific incidents prior to the crucifixion experience that we'll look to in a short while, because they're all of them significant in terms of our own personal spiritual development. And let's remember this is what unity talks about, our own personal spiritual development. We don't, as I said during the meditation, we don't have to go to a specific place set aside for the purpose. We don't have to go to an individual who alone can contact God on our behalf. Never see me as an intermediary between yourself and God, please. Also, unity concentrates on our ability to develop our own inner spiritual lives so that we may have a comforting, strengthening experience within the context of our own being. There is no particular rubric. There is no dogma, no doctrine that we must follow to achieve this. Just the will to reach that inner kingdom of heaven which Jesus proclaimed was within us all. And there we shall find the comfort, the solace, the hope, the faith that we need to help us move through life. Because Jesus never promised life would be easy, neither did he say it would be simple. But he did say that he would leave us the understanding to help us move through it ourselves. And that's why I want particularly to draw your attention to these three events. The first of these is, they're all found in Matthew. The first of these is Jesus' entry into Jerusalem. And Jesus entered Jerusalem in a very unusual, in a very strange way. The disciples went and did as Jesus had directed and brought a donkey. And they laid their cloaks on the donkey, and Jesus mounted. He got on the donkey and rode through the gates of the city, Jerusalem, the city of peace, Salam Shalom. He rode into Jerusalem for the Passover celebration. And he got on a donkey. People say, oh, so what? Do you know how undignified it is to ride a donkey? For the many years that Carol and I lived in Ireland, as I've suggested, we became well acquainted with the habits of donkeys. They do not provide ideal mounts. They are obdurate. They will not let you get on. They will back off. They will make an appalling noise. Has anyone ever heard a donkey bray? Sometimes they'll do it in the middle of the night and you'll jump up over there and say, oh, good grief, what's happening? Donkeys are not the ideal mode of transportation. And yet Jesus took this ride on a donkey, apparently even humiliating himself to do so. Why was this? The people, his own people, the Jewish people, expected Jesus at some point to cast off the image of a meek and mild individual, which he certainly wasn't. They expected him to take up a sword, a physical sword, and live up to the promise of a King David, to liberate the Jewish people from the yoke of the Roman Empire. They wanted him, in other words, to be a controlling, conquering individual who would exercise to the full his power and their power over those whom they saw as controlling them. But that was not Jesus' way. He had told people over and over again, my kingdom is not of this world. Don't ask me to be what you want me to be. Don't ask me to be this conquering hero with a sword. I don't believe, he's saying, that the way to spiritual understanding is the control of other people. And I've always read that passage in this light. I have to tell you, and I'll tell you again as I've told you before, from this very platform, I was not church as a young person. I didn't go to church. So when I encountered these stories for the first time, I didn't really carry any baggage with me. And I thought when I first read that story, I know what he's trying to tell us. I inherently sense what's being said. Now you say, oh, that's arrogant. You presume to say what Jesus and the church indeed has taught for 2,000 years. What is it do we say today? It resonated with me. Not happy with that word at all, but there you are. It's a neologism and one must live with it. It resonated with me, and I thought, he's telling me that I don't have to conquer in order to succeed and achieve. I can work with others, cooperate with others, and find within myself the innate secrets of being. If they're innate, they would be within, wouldn't they? And when I first came to Unity, I discovered that Unity believed this. We believe that we find peace, we find the connection with God within ourselves, not through the external flourishes and the controlling of other people and the submission of others to our will. We find it through this very, very quiet and contemplative discovery within ourselves. And that meant a huge amount to me. It set, for me at least, the tone of everything that was to follow. Jesus was not deluded, as some Bible scholars have thought. He was not going through a process of psychological denial. He knew very well what he was doing. But he knew that the kingdom that he was entering was a kingdom that was internal, that was innately his, and had nothing to do with the external flourishes, which so often we regard as important. Now, we live in a world of conformity, where all of us feel necessarily at one time or another that we must conform to the social or even the political norms. But we must never let go of this feeling of inner connection, that connection between ourselves and spirit, which is the heart and the ground even of our very being. That's where the truth lies. That's where the truth lies. Let me read to you of another incident. The supper, the Last Supper. During supper, Jesus took bread, and having said the blessing, he broke it, and gave it to his disciples with the words, "Take this and eat, this is my body." Then he took a cup, and having offered thanks to God, he gave it to them with the words, "Drink from it, all of you, from this is my blood." So much blood has been spilt over that event. Maybe some of you are familiar with the history of the church. You will realize that this question of what is sometimes termed the Eucharist or the Mass has become so crucial in church history that countless individuals have suffered for an improper observing of it. Let me for a moment put on my historian's little hat. It's not as good a hat as David has, and it may be invisible, but it's there. Jesus was celebrating the Passover meal with his disciples. The Passover, we know, celebrates the exodus of the Jews from Egypt. He's celebrating the Passover meal. Jews do this every year, even today, ask Rabbi Ted. And he's saying, when he breaks bread and they drink the wine, remember me, when you come to do this next year, as you certainly will as good Jews, when you come next year to celebrate this event, when you eat the bread and when you drink the wine, remember me. Remember that the body of my teachings is symbolized by the bread. Bread is the staff of life. It's symbolized by the bread. The spirit of my teachings is found in the wine. That's the very blood of what I tell you. These are well-known Aramaic metaphors. Bread signifies the body of something, the tangibility of something, and the wine symbolizes the spirit. We talked today about the substance and the spirit of the law, even, don't we? The letter of the law and the spirit of the law. We have the same metaphors in our own language. This is what Jesus was saying. When you meet next year, as you will, remember what I taught you. Remember the body of my truth. And remember the spirit that animated them. But when the church began to grow after Jesus' crucifixion, and I don't think Jesus would have recognized what happened very much. He might have done. I don't know. But this simple prescription became something that was fought over for countless generations. Because it was said that the body of Jesus was literally in the bread, and that his blood was literally in the wine. And when the priest elevated what was called the host, this miracle occurred. This miracle was called transubstantiation. I hate to give you another long word. Transubstantiation, which means the movement of the accidents. This is what a philosopher would say. The movement of the accidents from one substance to another. So the body and the blood are present in the consecrated wine and bread. And if you didn't acknowledge this, if you didn't subscribe to it, if you didn't take that meal that the priest consecrated in that way, you were cast out of the community. It was used as a means of control. The very thing that I believe Jesus indicated earlier in his ministry and demonstrated by his ride into Jerusalem that he was not interested in. Christianity became a controlling factor in people's lives. I'm not anti-Christian. I would think of myself as a Christian. But I don't believe that we have the right or the ability, if we know in truth what we are, to control the lives of others. But that simple remembrance meal that Jesus took all those years ago became increasingly a mark in the church of one's acceptability. If you didn't agree with that, you were cast out. And at some point in the development of Christianity, you would die. You could be burned at the stake. Burned at the stake for not believing in that ritual. In the time of the Reformation, in the 16th century, that's the 1500s, a new idea arose. It was called consubstantiation. Are you with me? This is what Luther advocated. Luther said, well, the accidents, meaning the elements, the accidents of the bread and wine are not actually changed when the priest elevates the wafer. They're not actually changed. What happens is the blood and the body enter into those elements and they sort of surround it. That's called consubstantiation. If you can get your head around that one, you'll understand what consubstantiation is. In that same century, in the 16th century, there was a man called Ulrich Zwingli. Z-W-I-N-G-L-I. Zwingli. He was a Swiss. And he said, no. He said, the Eucharist is purely a commemoration. Exactly what Jesus was saying. He said the commemoration takes place once a year. So he advocated communion, as we sometimes call it, once a year. You remember Jesus' teachings and the passion, we would say today. Totally misused word in present context, never mind. That the passion in Jesus' words is to be found in that recollection. You remember what the master teacher told us and what he died for to show us. It's a commemoration. Poor Zwingli died in battle in 1532, but there were all kinds of religious wars in those days, even in dear old Switzerland. But what we have done very often is to allow that Eucharistic notion to separate us from our Maker by allowing somebody else on our behalf to approach God and to control what we do as a result of that phenomenon, of that experience. Now, some of you here may be devout in another faith. I don't know. And I haven't the slightest wish to cast any aspersion on your belief in communion or in the Mass or anything else. If you believe this and if it works for you, that's absolutely fine. Unity is not in the business of disparaging other religions or other people. I merely mention this because I think, historically speaking, this is what occurred. We have communion sometimes in unity. We have a spiritual communion. We have a service of spiritual communion, which is very beautiful. But it doesn't have anything to do with wine and bread, and it doesn't say that Jesus' actual body or actual blood are in any accidents, in any elements of whatever might be used. What I'm saying here too is that Jesus wants us to remember, as a master teacher, when you recall what I taught, you will be on that right path. You will discover the kingdom of heaven within you. You will listen to my teachings and you will have a spiritual existence that reaffirms your eternal nature in God. A beautiful, beautiful message that he wanted to remind his fellow religionists, the Jews, could transpire every year when they met together. It happens in our hearts every time. We have spiritual community in our hearts every time we turn to Spirit. When we turn to God, and as I said in the meditation, say, I am one with God. That is a communion. That is a spiritual communion. Special, unique, present in you. something that touches and changes in the most extraordinary way. And very, very quickly I go to the third event, the preparation for Easter. Jesus came with his disciples to a place called Gethsemane. He said to them, "Sit here while I go over there to pray." And he went over to pray in his time of great need. And he came to the disciples after and found them asleep. "What? Could none of you stay awake with me for 1 hour? Stay awake and support me during this time of test?" Not one of them had stayed awake. The Garden of Gethsemane, that place where he came to pray before the final ordeal that he endured. And that, I think, reminds us again of the singularity of our relationship with God, with Spirit. We may have surrounding us all the help that we can imagine. A loving partner, a wonderful spouse. Maybe we have beautiful children or grandchildren. We may have friends. We may have medical advisors. We may have financial advisors. We may have all the help that you can imagine in the world. But you know, the truth of the matter is, we're always basically on our own, are we not? Now, some people will say, "I don't want to even think about that. I don't want to even think about that." But I've been with enough people in my ministry who were in extremis, who understood what it meant to be alone. And at that time, nobody, however good their intentions, however loving their desire, nobody can help us but ourselves. And if we have not built that inner strength, that contact point, as it were, with Spirit, and I hate to use any kind of vertical gesture because that's not the way it is. If we have not built that connection, then we are alone indeed, are we not? And I know that thought may even to some people be frightening, perhaps offensive. And they say, "No, I'm surrounded with all the help and the love and everything that I can get." Yes, that's absolutely true, and it helps. It certainly helps. But there are times in our lives, in all of our lives, when we find ourselves alone with our Maker. That's it. And if we haven't developed that sense of oneness of which Jesus talks, if we haven't discovered even an inkling of that kingdom within us, the strength, the joy, the support, the eternal love, something somewhere is going to leave us as bereft as Jesus momentarily was in the garden. He was, to my understanding, a human being. And so he felt alone. He felt alone. That's why I, many times with Carol, feel for you. When you call me up, as some of you do, and say, "You know, I've got a problem, I've got an issue, I'm going into hospital maybe." You know, one does everything one can, of course, to support and strengthen that individual. But they have to go through it on their own. That's the truth of existence. That's the meaning of spiritual growth itself. We've got to make it on our own. And we can only do that when we find that inner link and somehow have the faith and the hope that it generates in our own experience. So these are the three little events that take place. All of them are preparation for the ultimate renewal, the resurrection into new life. But I wanted to present them to you this morning in a perhaps slightly new way. It may not be for you a palatable way, I don't know. But I'm a sharer of ideas, as you well know. And if anyone disagrees, violently or otherwise, please let me know. I'd be delighted to involve myself in an extended dialogue if you wish. I probably think you wouldn't, because it might go on quite some time. But you're free to do so if you want. And I invite you to look at these events, perhaps, and think of them in terms of the significance of your own spiritual adventure.